hit record, and Kathy, thank you. So hello, welcome. On behalf of the Shawnee County State Research and Extension Office, welcome. Today's presentation is the fifth and final of our Fall into Gardening series. We are so pleased to have our Shawnee County Master Gardener, Lynn Weaver, joining us today with her presentation, Plant Propagation. Before I turn it over to Lynn, I'd like to ask that all participants turn off their cameras and turn off their microphones for the duration of the presentation. If you should have any questions, please type them over in the chat box. And once the presentation is over, we can all turn on our mics and our cameras back on and have some Q&A. We will be recording today's webinar, which you'll be able to find later this week on YouTube, our website, and also Kathy Bartles will send out a copy to all of our registered participants along with a short survey. I ask that you please do fill out our 3-minute survey. It helps us to continue provide quality programming. So without further ado, it is wonderful to introduce Lynn Weaver. Lynn, thanks so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk about something I dearly love, which is plant propagation. We have a lot to talk about, so let's dig in. My screen is not sharing. Let's try that.
Let's see. Kathy, did you get your, yeah, you stopped sharing your screen.
So let me try this again.
Okay. There we go. Perfect.
Okay, I'm not seeing the little lectern down there.
Well, I can still see, it still looks as if it's in presentation style, so.
So we're good to go?
Yes, because I can't see the, yeah, it looks like just the slide.
Okay, very good. Thanks for waiting. I do love plant propagation. What is that? It is simply an increase in the number of plants by either sexual reproduction by seed or asexual reproduction by using plant parts, leaves, stems, and roots. You're going to invest some effort into this, so you want to use good quality seeds, either from local dealers, seed catalogs, friends. You can save your own seed. Either way, you want seeds from a reputable company. If you're saving your seeds from prior years, you can do a germination test on those to make sure they are viable. It's pretty straightforward. Take 10 seeds, place them between 2 moist paper towels, not sopping wet, but just moist. Place those paper towels in a Ziploc, closed part way, and put that Ziploc in a warm place. Leave it alone for 1 week, go back and count the number of seeds that have germinated. So how are you going to know they've germinated? Well, they're going to look different than when you put them in there. You might see a little white root coming out one end of the seed or a little green something. Those seeds are on their way. So you're going to count the number of seeds that have germinated. Either write that down or keep it in mind, and then put your Ziploc back in its warm place. Go back in another week and count again how many additional seeds have germinated. Add those numbers together, and that's what your percent germination is. For example, if the first week you had 5 seeds germinate, the second week you had 3 seeds, 3 additional seeds germinate, 5 plus 3 is 8. You've got an 80% germination rate for those seeds. Fresh seed will germinate faster than old seed. You want to keep your seed package, and you want to read your seed package because there's a lot of good information on there. Very importantly, you want to know the number of days to germinate, because even though you're going to be checking your seeds every day, you want to know when to really expect seeing something in that seed pot. We'll talk about planting depth, seed and row spacing, how to grow your plants once you've got them up, disease resistance, and number of days to maturity. So when are you going to start your seeds? And this is very hard for those of us that love gardening, because as soon as it warms up in the spring, man, we want to be out there. We want to be planting seeds, planning ahead. As a general rule, 4 to 8 weeks are needed for vegetables and 10 to 14 weeks for flower transplants. For example, in the Master Gardener greenhouse, we plant our tomatoes about 4 weeks ahead of the time we want them for our annual plant sale. We plant our pepper seeds about 5 weeks ahead of the time we want them. Petunias and vinca, they usually take anywhere from 10 to 14 weeks and need to be planted that far ahead. Around here, our average last spring frost date is April 26th or so, and that's another reason not to rush planting your seeds. You can grow these seedlings, you can get them out in the soil, but that soil at the end of April is cold, and those plants aren't likely to want to grow too quickly at that point. So gear your planting time to planting out the first or second week in May. So select your outdoor planting date, and then use the number of weeks to flower on the seed package. Count the weeks backward on the calendar from your outdoor planting date and plant your seeds on or around that date. Some seeds you want to mimic the natural process of subjecting the seeds to a cold Kansas winter. That's called stratification. And you can do that by putting your seeds in the refrigerator for 6 or 8 weeks. Some seeds need moist stratification, and you're going to do that by putting your seeds in a bag of moist sand, Ziploc, and put that in the refrigerator for 6 to 8 weeks. Scarification is a physical way to degrade the seed coat to allow moisture to reach the plant embryo in the seed and to allow growth to begin. And you can scarify seeds by rubbing them against sandpaper, actually chipping a little bit of seed off with a knife. Seeds that need scarification are like nasturtium, lupin, sweet pea. Seeds that need stratification, catmint, perennial, butterfly weed, golden Alexander. So how are you going to do this? Well, you get to get your hands dirty finally. You need to get some germination soil. Germination soil is different from potting soil in that it is a lighter, fluffier mix that makes it easier for the roots to go down and the stem to come up through. You're going to moisten that germination soil and then put it in a clean container with drainage holes. Fill the container till it's almost full, leaving just a little bit of space, a 1/2 inch or 3/4 of an inch for watering, and then level the surface. You're going to plant your seeds at the depth recommended on the seed package. A general rule of thumb is 2 times the diameter of the seed. You definitely want to label each row or pot with what you've planted there, because when things start coming up, many things look just the same, and you're going to want to know what's what and what's where. After planting, you want to mist the soil, moisten it again, and I like to use a mist bottle because you started with moist soil, so you don't need a lot of additional water, but you do want to add a little bit of water to settle that seed down into the soil to give good seed-soil contact. Lighting is important for germination because some seeds require light to germinate, some require dark. Petunias, snapdragons, and salvia are examples of annuals that that require light for germination. After planting, you're going to mist those seeds in, and then you're going to cover it with a clear plastic bag, plastic wrap, or a clear dome. Then you can put your container under a shop light about 3 inches, want your light 3 inches above the soil, and on a timer for 16 hours. Last year was the first year we started experimenting with LED lights in the greenhouse. We found that we could use those 6 to 12 inches above the seeds and leave them on for a lesser amount. Seeds that require dark to germinate, zinnias, tomatoes, peppers, for example, you're going to plant those, you're going to mist them in, and then you're going to cover your container with a tray or a black plastic bag, something that provides some darkness. People tell me that they germinate on windowsills, but really, windowsills are too cold and too dark. Bottom heat is beneficial when you're germinating seeds. Most seeds need a soil temperature between 65 and 75 degrees to germinate, except, look at the bottom, early garden crops like peas and broccoli, lettuces, radishes, and other vegetables like cool soil. So you're going to have those outside in the garden and not on your heating pad. Most houses in the winter are not 65 or 70 degrees, especially at night. So you can get a heating pad to speed germination and provide more uniform germination. You're going to have your container on the heating pad only until the majority of the seeds have germinated. If you leave it on longer, those plants are going to grow too quickly. They're going to be tall and spindly, not strong stemmed, and you're also opening the door to fungal diseases. You're going to look at your seed container every day, mist it with room temperature water if needed. You may not need to water every day. So what you want to do is just pinch a little bit of the soil between your fingers. If it feels dry, mist them. If not, then just close your plastic back up and check them the next day. You want to allow a little bit of drying between waterings, but don't allow the seedlings to wilt. If you want to water your seed container from the bottom, you can do that by setting the container into another container with room temperature tap water in it and leave it for 20 to 30 minutes. You'll notice that the soil on top of your container changes from a lighter brown to a darker brown, indicating that the moisture level has risen that high. Take your seed container out, let it drain well, and you're good to go. If you're using a flower pot like pictured, you're going to want to apply enough water so that water drips out of the drainage holes. You need to learn about and be watching for damping off, which is a condition caused by fungi in overly moist soil. So avoid overwatering. How to take care of your seedlings. You're going to mist them daily if needed. You're going to, once they're up an inch and a half, you want to wean them off of their cover. They've been growing in that protected environment, steady humidity, steady temperatures, but now they're a little bigger. You need to wean them so that they become used to your room environment. You can wean them off by either lifting the cover beginning for an hour each day, or peeling back a little bit of the plastic to allow room air in there. And over the course of 10 to 14 days, acclimate your youngsters to their new environment. You can have a fan blowing once the lid's off, the covering is off. You might want to have a fan blow on them during the day to help strengthen the stems. Or here's your chance to pet your plants. Just take your palm and gently rub your palm over the top of your seedlings. You'll see the little stems bend over and bounce back up. and that also will strengthen those stems. Very, very important is to harden off your plants before you move them outside. You want to follow a schedule. A good rule is to set out your seedlings in a shady place out of the wind for about 3 hours the first time they're outdoors, and then bring them back in at night. And every few days, you leave them out a little bit longer. Soon you give them an hour of sun, few days, a few more hours of sun. Do try to keep them out of the wind for at least the first week so they have a chance to toughen up. When you plant them, you're going to plant them at the proper depth, which is the depth they were growing at in your container. You're going to space them according to what the seed package said, or according to your watering system if you have a drip system. It is a good idea to leave some distance between seedlings as disease prevention, because that allows for air circulation. And of course, anytime you plant something, you water it in to get that good soil root contact and to ensure continued growth. Some crops can be planted directly in the soil. Larger seeds like beans, for example, look at your package and plant those. I think it says maybe 4 or 6 inches apart. Just put those right in the ground in a shallow furrow. Some crops benefit from being transplanted. Those would be things that are difficult to germinate uniformly, seeds that need high soil temperatures to germinate, or plants that benefit from a head start. Here's a list, if you want to maybe take a picture of this for future reference. What seeds prefer direct seeding right into the garden, and what seeds prefer to be transplanted. So I'm not going to read that whole list, but you can see that beans and carrots, corn, cucumbers, kale, peas, the greens, spinach and chard and so on. You can plant those right in the ground. Things that prefer to be transplanted: basil, broccoli, cauliflower, peppers and tomatoes. So that's a guide for you. As mentioned, larger seeded crops can be seeded at their final spacing. Look at your seed package and see that those seeds need to be planted 3 to 6 inches apart, and plant accordingly in a shallow row according to what it says on the package, 1 inch deep, 2 inches deep, or whatever. Smaller seeded crops, like a lot of the spring greens, lettuce, and spinach, they can be seeded in a furrow, which is a row, and thinned when they're 1 to 2 inches tall. So you can come along and gently pull out the extras, or you can use a small scissor and cut them off right at the soil level. To be successful, you're going to plant those seeds at the correct depth. Otherwise, they may not have the energy to break through the soil. If you plant them too shallow, they may be washed away by one of our spring Kansas thunderstorms, or eaten by birds or squirrels. This happened to us this spring. We planted a great green bean patch, went out the next morning, and the squirrels had a heyday in there and excavated many of our seeds. So next year, I'm going to put an old screen wire over those planted beans, secure around the edges of it with some bricks or something like that, and keep those squirrels out of it. Of course, you want to maintain moist soil until germination occurs, and reduce weed competition by watering only those areas where your seeds are. And if you have soaker hoses, they're perfect. So, can you plant old seeds? Sure you can. Store them properly and they'll last from 1 to XD number of years. Let's just look at 1-year-old seed here: onions, parsnips, spinach, parsley maybe. In my experience, parsley has not germinated well for me. So that is one package of seeds that I buy fresh every year. 2-year-old corn and pea seed, beans come up fine. 4-year-old peppers, chard kale, watermelon, basil come up fine. 5-year-old seed, broccoli, tomatoes, lettuce, cucumbers, all do well. You want to store your seeds in a cool, dark, dry place, like a refrigerator. I usually buy the Master Gardener seeds about 6 months ahead of time, and that's just what I do with them. I put them in a Ziploc, squeeze out the air, and put the Ziploc in a rectangular Tupperware or Rubbermaid container, put the lid on, and put them in the refrigerator. You can store seeds in the freezer, but you must get all the water out of them first. And you can use some silica gel to accomplish that. So moving on to asexual propagation, different types: division, separation, cuttings, layering, grafting, or tissue culture. Division is the most successful form. You start with a whole plant and you end up with a whole plant. So you can create several smaller plants from one. It's a good idea to divide your perennials every 3 to 4 years to keep them healthy. You want to divide them in the non-blooming season. For example, columbine blooms in the spring, so you want to divide it in the fall. Asters bloom in the fall, so you want to divide them in the spring. Summer bloomers like hosta, daylilies, liriope, you can pretty much divide those anytime. Division by growth form. Some plants have a compressed stem growth form, where the stem is right at or just below the soil. For example, strawberries. Only the leaves are above, and the stem spreads and sends out new roots and shoots. Some plants send out stolons or rhizomes. So what's the difference between those two? Stolons are above ground, like the ground cover ajuga. Rhizomes are below ground, and we see that in bamboo and some ferns. Roots and shoots grow from the stem nodes, which is right where the leaf begins. And some examples are gooseneck loosestrife, strawberry, or English ivy. Separation is similar, only here we're separating parts of the plant. We're not starting with whole plants, and we're not ending up with whole plants. Sometimes separation is used just to describe corms and bulbs. So what's the difference between those two? A corm is an underground stem used for overwintering storage. Gives rise to cormels or secondary corms, and we see this in freesia and gladiolus. A bulb is an underground structure that holds the complete life cycle, not just the stem. Bulbs give rise to bulblets, and we see this in tulips, daffodil, and garlic, and lilies. Cuttings are my favorite method of propagation. It does create a wound that opens the door for water loss and disease. So you want to start out with clean utensils, clean pots, clean 6-packs, and new potting soil. You want to encourage rapid root growth. So you might want to use a rooting hormone. Rooting hormones come in liquid, gel, and powder, and they contain synthetic hormones similar to those that occur naturally in plants. Do a little research to see if what you want to propagate requires rooting hormone. Not everything does. Usually not necessary to use rooting hormone unless what you're going to propagate requires it or is something that is difficult to root. You're going to keep the cuttings at room temperature. So there are stem, root, and leaf cuttings. Herbaceous plants, just to remind you, have no persistent woody stems above the ground. Examples of herbaceous annuals would be like begonias or coleus. Herbaceous perennials, mint, chrysanthemums, okay? Woody plants, those are shrubs and trees. And on woody plants, you can take softwood, semi-hardwood, or hardwood cuttings. Softwood cutting you take starting in the spring through about the end of July. This works well on lilacs, forsythia, or wigelia. Semi-hardwood cuttings you take after new growth has slowed in the spring, so you're talking about late summer. The stems are firmer, and this works well on butterfly bush, hollies, and yews. Hardwood cutting, you take on dormant wood after leaf drop. And forsythia and crepe myrtles do well with hardwood cuttings. Regardless of what kind of cutting you take, the steps are pretty much the same. Again, you're going to use a very clean technique. New potting soil, clean knife, clean pots, 6-packs. Cut off a 3 to 4 inch piece of a non-flowering stem. You want about 4 leaves or so. You want a non-flowering stem because you want all the energy of that plant to go into rooting, not into going ahead and making the flower and the subsequent seeds. You're going to cut the stem at a 45-degree angle just below a leaf. And why there? Because the cells involved in growth are most concentrated at the leaf nodes. So cutting just below a leaf optimizes root formation. Rooting hormone, again, do your research. You're going to insert the cutting into moist soil and firm the soil around the stem. You know, sometimes when you stick something in soil, you have a little gappiosis there. The soil's not right up next to the stem. Well, you want to be sure and firm that soil around the stem because those roots need to grow into the soil. You're going to cover your container with the cutting to provide a moist environment. And to me, this is the key to success. I've taken cuttings for a lot of years, and just in the last few, tumbled to the fact that I need to cover those cuttings to provide a moist environment, and my rate of success skyrocketed. So you're going to put your cutting in, you're going to cover it with something, and we'll talk more about that in just a little bit. And in about 10 or 14 days, you're going to notice that those cuttings look kind of perky. They're standing up tall, looking strong, and then you can suspect that rooting has occurred. Simple or tip layering is a stem cutting while the stem is still attached to the mother plant. A portion of the stem is buried to encourage root formation. And why is this advantageous? Well, because the stem is still attached to the parent plant and receiving nutrition and water from the parent. What you do is bend a low-growing, flexible stem to the ground and cover it with soil. Leave several inches of stem above the soil and bend the tip vertically and secure it with a landscape stake or a pin. Roots are usually growing at the bend in the stem, and this works well on forsythia, boxwood, azalea, and rhododendrons. Other kinds of layering, mound layering is one. Rarely do we tell you to cover up the crown of a plant with soil, but with mound layering, that's what you do. Mound layering works well on heavy-stemmed, closely branched shrubs like spirea. So in the spring, mound soil over the crown of the plant and keep the soil moist. By late summer, roots should have formed along those stems, and you can cut them up and pot them. Multiple layering, you've probably seen this in your yards with ground covers like vinca or sedum. Works well on ivies, philodendron, and pothos. The stem comes in contact with the soil And where that happens, roots start to form, especially if you put just a little bit of soil over the stem. Air layering is often used on tropical plants like fiddle leaf fig, Dieffenbachia, rubber plants, also works on holly and magnolia. What you do, a stem or a shoot is wounded with a shallow cut or by making gently removing a ring of bark around the stem. And then a plastic sleeve with moist sphagnum peat moss and rooting hormone is wrapped around the stem and secured at both ends with a twist tie. You want to check this little bundle about once a week. Make sure it stays moist. If it looks dry, open that top twist tie and pour in a little water and tighten it up again. In 2 to 3 months, you should be able to see roots through that plastic. So at that point, you can support the stem and cut off below the lower end, unwrap the plastic, and pot up your new plant. I've never tried grafting, but it looks pretty interesting. Grafting is the joining of 2 or more plants so they become one. It's very popular among nurserymen because they like to graft different kinds of apples onto different kinds of apple trees, for example. That way they might have a delicious apple with a Jonagold branch grafted on and a Honeycrisp grafted on another place. And not only do they get 3 different kinds of apples from one apple tree, is they extend their harvest because all those mature at different times of the year, different weeks in the fall, for example. Important terms to know: scion is the plant above the graft union. Stalk is the plant below the graft union. So do a little review here. Remember that the cambium is a narrow band of regenerative cells just below the bark. The cambium of the scion needs to come in contact with the cambium of the stalk plant, and a bridge will grow between the two in just a few days. This allows the scion to benefit from the sap that is starting to flow in the stalk plant. So that right there tells you, as far as timing is concerned, you need to do this in the spring when growth is just beginning and sap is beginning to move. You need to graft with compatible plants, apples to apples, pears to pear, tomatoes. I've heard of grafted tomatoes. There are other techniques than that pictured. In the picture, they've made a slit in the stalk. They've made a wedge for the scion, and they insert the scion into the wedge and then just tape it up and let it grow together. There are other techniques, and you can find those online, but you do want to practice, practice, practice for success. Tissue culture is very interesting, and it works because of something called totipotency, which is the ability of a cell to differentiate into other cell types. And professionals use this to create thousands of plants from one plant. It requires sterile conditions, so most home gardeners are not going to be doing tissue culture. How it works is a tissue sample is scraped from the parent plant and run through many rinsings with bleach water to make it as sterile or as clean as possible. Then those tissue samples are placed in an agar growth medium containing nutrients and auxins are plant growth hormones. So the first solution they put it in is a solution favoring leaf and shoot growth. After about 4 weeks, they have a lot of little shoots coming up. About 4 weeks after that, they move each little individual and place it in a media favoring root growth. And in another 4 weeks, they have a lot of plants with a lot of roots. They let those grow on for another month or so before planting in soil. So you can understand how those of us who garden at home, we might be able to get 2 or 3 divisions from a housteplant over the course of a season. These nurserymen that use tissue culture, they can get up to 10,000 plants per year. Well, I don't know about you, but I don't have any sterile conditions in my house. So let's talk about some things that we can propagate. I visited my sister last January, and she loves succulents. So we just went around and took off parts and pieces of different succulents. I brought those home and put them in a saucer of moist potting soil. Put the date on it, and then just checked it every 3 days or so to make sure that the soil stayed moist. By the way, this is a saucer. There are no holes in the bottom. And we all know succulents don't like overly moist soil. So I just kept the soil kind of moist. And if it dried out a little bit, the plants told me. They looked a little wilty, then I would know to water. And about 8 weeks later, everything started looking perky, standing up, showing a little new growth, and I knew that they were rooted. As you can see that bottom left-hand picture there, nice roots on that. The last 2 pictures, we took a big piece of jade plant, just stuck it in a pot of soil, and it rooted. My favorite is Coleus Propagation, and here are some ideas of things you can use at home. On the left there, that's just a pot and a saucer inside a large Ziploc bag when the bag's closed up. The top center picture, well, you guessed it, that is a clear shower cap, and it fits perfectly over a 6-pack. The bottom picture, these days they make a lot of cake pans with plastic lids. So I have a 6-pack in there with a plastic lid. My favorite thing to use on the right side there is called a humididome. These are available online. The reason I like the humididome is that it is about 8 inches tall. So if you have taller cuttings like Coleus, you've got plenty of room. Other things you can use are plastic lettuce and spinach containers, strawberry containers. You do need to make sure that they have holes in the bottom. If you don't, you can make them by poking holes and then placing that container in another. My container here with the humididome is, those are 6-packs in a flat with holes, inside another flat with no holes. Just to remind you, you want to firm the soil around the stem of your cutting, and humidity is essential. I don't even water in my humididome for about 10 days. I start with moist soil, and there's so much humidity in there, excuse me, it doesn't need additional water. Like in your seedling pack, you need to taper these plants away from the humidity. So I usually I either take the lid off my cuttings for an hour at a time, several days in a row, and slowly add more time with the cover off. Or sometimes I prop the cover up just a little bit to let it get used to room conditions, temperature and humidity. Other things you have around your house you might want to propagate. Left-hand picture, there's a piece of Christmas cactus, a piece of Sansevieria or snake plant or mother-in-law tongue, whatever you call that, and 2 different kinds of pothos. If you look at the green pothos there, you can actually see where roots are starting right behind that leaf node. Those are just begging to be propagated. So I took those and I put them in a container of moist, clean potting soil. I read that the Sansevieria does not like to be covered, so I left everything uncovered. I don't have the Christmas cactus in there yet because it needs to callus for 2 or 3 days before being put in the soil. And I would suggest putting Christmas cactus cuttings in a small pot so that they can stand upright and have a little more support. Airplane plants, of course, you probably know you can either stick those in a glass of water or you could stick those in the soil. For completeness sake, I should mention that you can propagate African violets and Rex begonias from individual leaves, but time constraint does not really allow me to go into that. In the right picture there, you see my happy place. I've got my humididome and my shower cap 6-pack and my open flat there waiting to root. It is illegal to propagate plants that are patented. How do you know they're patented? Well, look on the back of your plant label, and if it says propagation prohibited, please don't propagate those. Pay attention to that because I don't want any of you to end up in jail. Here are 3 good resources for learning about propagation. These are all books that can be checked out from the Extension Office Master Gardener Library. The bottom right book, Propagating Plants, lists, well, as it says on the cover, over 1,500 plants and how to create new plants from them, how to propagate. It was a great book and a good resource for me. I thank you for listening. Are there any questions?
Oh, wow, Lynn. I hope we can all unmute our microphones and turn our videos back on. And if we have any questions.
I have a couple questions. One, sometimes like, you know, I'll buy some fruit or vegetables, say peppers, and I save the seeds. And do they do something to the seeds to where you cannot duplicate the plant and grow from them? Do you know? I've had trouble with that. I'm a seed saver. And even like, for instance, on some of my flowers that I've saved the seeds, the next year when I plant those seeds that I saved, they don't look quite the same as the flowers they originated from.
To answer your last question, a lot of our flowers are hybrid and do not come true from seed. You know, you'll probably get, or you can get an attractive plant, but it may not be, you know, the very thing that you took seeds from. And Ariel, can you answer the first part of that question?
Yes. So the short answer is yes. Seed companies, when they're breeding plants for us to purchase, tomatoes and peppers is a great example. What they're breeding for is the most delicious tomato, a disease-resistant tomato. You know, they're sort of breeding for all these characteristics. As a result, you can sometimes lose that same aggressive characteristics that most seeds have where they want to live. You can lose some of that because they're inbreeding it a lot for the desirable characteristics. The second part is seed companies absolutely try to breed their seeds so that you can't save seeds. And that's because they're a business. They want to make money and they don't want you to take those seeds. So they do breed it to make it difficult.
Okay, because it just seems a little harder over the last couple of years, so they must be getting really good at that.
They're good at it, which is why you'll see a lot of people really interested in heirloom varieties.
Yeah.
Carolyn Hall over in the chat box was wondering if you could elaborate on propagating spirea shrubs.
Well, you mound soil around the base, keep that soil moist during the summer, and by the end of the summer, you pull the soil away and you should be able to see roots at the base of the stems of the spirea branches. And then you can cut those off and have new plants.
I've got a question. How do you propagate Rose's Sharon plants?
Do you need to?
You come to my house and just take whatever you want.
They self-seed very readily. I would try any of those methods, mounding or air layering, maybe taking some soft tip cuttings in the spring.
Okay. But it's too late right now, right?
You know, I'm an experimenter, so if you want it, I would sure try it.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
This is Carol Bragdon. Have you ever tried doing bay leaf propagation? I've not had much success with that.
No, because I think I've only had one bay leaf plant in my whole life. Do you have a bay leaf plant that you want to propagate?
I have a rather large one that needs propagating, cut back, and I've tried rooting it in water. That definitely doesn't work. So maybe I'll try some root stimulant and put it in dirt. Maybe that might work. Any other suggestions?
I'd put it in, use root stimulant. You know, first of all, I'd get, you know, as fresh a cutting as you could, like if there's some newer growth underneath or inside, find a softer branch. I would use rooting hormone, and I would put it in a small pot inside a big Ziploc bag.
Okay. If I have success, I shall share.
Oh, thank you.
If it's the bay leaf at Ward Mead, and that sucker is huge.
Yes, it is. It goes to the greenhouse every winter. It started out fairly small, but that's a large greenhouse with very expert caregivers.
I think I saw a question about what does damping off look like. In your seedling container, right at the soil level, the stems look, and Ariel, you may maybe need to help me with this. The stems look kind of brown and thin, and the seedlings just keel over. And it tends to be in a circular pattern, like in your seed tray, a circular area of seedlings will have died off. Anything else?
No, you're right. It almost looks like the stems lost all their weight right at the bottom and then turned brown and keeled over.
Okay.
Well, if we don't have any other questions.
I have one question.
Yeah,
When you're
Carmen.
putting plants out, I have a cat that's an outdoor cat, and it was digging at my lettuce. How do you keep the cat out of the lettuce?
Couple ideas. You can plant your lettuce in a pot. It does great in containers. I like to use, or, you know, of course you can use a screen wire covering or a fence, you know, some kind of covering. I use either cayenne pepper or pizza pepper seeds sprinkled throughout the planting bed. I know that keeps squirrels out pretty reliably. Anybody else have any other ideas?
Is it your cat, Carmen, or is it somebody else's?
I have an indoor cat that's it's 8 years old, and I just took in a new cat, and it goes out there. It doesn't really, it kind of dances around the lettuce. It doesn't really do anything, but first time I saw it, I thought, what is that cat doing, you know?
Cats are big on texture, so anything you can do on the soil surface that's uncomfortable, like anything that's pokey, even like balls of aluminum foil or anything that makes them a little, not to hurt their paws, but just something pokey, it can keep them out of areas. Everything Lynn said is absolutely true too, but cats are too smart for their own good and sometimes like to watch you do things.
Yeah, and it's a baby, so it's still a baby. So
Mhm.
I saw a picture of somebody putting plastic cutlery, like plastic forks, around their
yes.
plant.
Yeah. Stab plastic forks, the handle end down into the ground, so all those sharp ends are sticking up. That's a great thing, Leslie. So is anybody wondering what I'm going to do with 36 Coleus cuttings this time of year? Well, I do have a plan. We live in an old house that has a sleeping porch on the south side, so there's 3 sides of windows. When the Coleus is well rooted, I'll transplant those into either 4-inch pots or put 2 in a 6-inch pot. And I'll keep them through the winter on the sleeping porch. And it gets down to probably 55 or 60 degrees out there because of all those windows. And when I took the Master Gardener training, they said, don't expect your indoor plants to grow during the winter. Just hope they survive. And that's really what they do. They just kind of sit there and not put on new growth. But about the 1st of March, when it starts getting sunnier and the days are longer, they start growing. And so when they're big enough, I take cuttings on them and root those. So I actually do this cutting process twice a year.
Oh no!
We lost her.
Maybe she'll find her way back. I'm not
Oh,
sure
no.
how quickly though. I know she X'd out of her email and was getting the link through the email, so she might have to.
That's too bad.
I know.
While we're all on here, I know a lot of you are Shawnee County Extension Master Gardeners, and I'm also recognizing a couple names as other Master Gardeners. Carmen is going to be a Shawnee County Extension Master Gardener. She's joining us from a different, Carmen, what chapter did you come from?
Jackson County.
So welcome. As soon as I saw you on there, I was like, you told me you were going to join. So we're so glad to have you.
I'm excited because Kansas is so different from Missouri, even soil-wise.
Definitely soil. Okay, Lynn just texted me. She's having technical difficulties, so she won't be back on with us.
Oh, bummer. Well, I just wanted to say Cindy's comment, Cindy Stevens, said that was a lot of great information. I'm going to have to watch it a few more times to absorb everything. And I think you're right, Cindy. I'm going to too. So, well, thank you all for joining us. I would like to extend my thanks to Lynn, and I'd also like to thank all of you for joining us. I hope you learned something new today and are encouraged to propagate some new plants, maybe start some from seed, maybe start some from a leaf, maybe grow a mutant apple. This is our 5th and final presentation for the Fall into Gardening series. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you soon. Take care.
Thank you all for doing this.
Thanks, Carolyn.